They had been friends since they were 9 years old. They grew up on the same street, went to the same school, and somehow ended up with the same dream to make music that actually meant something. Not the kind of music that plays in the background at a supermarket. The kind that stops you right where you are and makes you feel like someone, somewhere, truly understood you. By the time they were in their mid-20s, they had built something real. A small band, a loyal crowd, late nights in a cramped rehearsal space that smelled like old carpet and takeout food. They did not have a big record deal or millions of streams, but they had each other, and they had the music. And for a long time, that felt like enough. He was the songwriter. She was the voice. That was how it always worked between them. He would come in with a scrap of paper or a voice note on his phone, humming something half-formed, and she would find the words that fit around it. They never argued about who wrote what. The songs just came out of both of them, the way breathing comes out of one body. There was one song, though, that he kept all to himself. He had been working on it for years. Not every day, not in any disciplined way. More like the way someone returns to a letter they keep meaning to send but can never quite finish. He would play a few bars and then stop. He would write a verse and then cross it out. She had heard pieces of it over the years. A melody error, chord change there. She never pushed him about it. She could feel that this one was different. This one was personal in a way she could not fully reach. She used to tease him about it, gently. "You're going to be 80 years old, still writing that song," she would say. He would laugh and say, she was probably right. Then he would close his notebook, and they would move on to something else. What she did not know, for a long time, was that the song was partly about her. Not in a romantic way. It was more complicated than that, and more tender. It was about the kind of friendship that holds you up when everything else is falling. The kind you do not talk about much, because you do not have the right words for it. He had been trying to find those words for years. That was why the song was never finished. Some things are so big and so quietly important that putting them into a 3-minute melody feels almost insulting. Then the illness came. It started with a tiredness that did not go away. Then there were the tests, and more tests, and eventually a word that no one wants to hear, sitting in a small white room with fluorescent lighting. He told her the day he found out. He called her before he even called his own family. She drove to his flat and they sat on his kitchen floor. Not the sofa, not the chairs. Justa flora, and they did not say very much. She made tea. He stared at the wall. At some point she took his hand and held it, and that was enough for that night. The next several months were a kind of strange, tender chaos. There were hospital appointments and medication schedules, and days when he could barely get out of bed. She organized everything she could. She drove him to his treatments. She made food. He barely ate. She learned which nurses were kind and which ones were not. She sat in waiting rooms reading old magazines and pretending she was not scared. But through all of it, he kept going back to the song. Not every day. Some days he was too tired to hold a pen. But on the good days, the days when the light came through his window at the right angle and the pain was manageable and he felt almost like himself, he would open the notebook and keep going. She would hear him sometimes, humming quietly in the other room. She never walked in uninvited. She would just stand near the door for a moment, listening, and then go back to whatever she was doing. The song was getting longer. That much she could tell. One evening, about 3 weeks before the end, he called her into the room. He was sitting up in bed, the old notebook open on his lap, and he looked at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not sad, exactly. More like someone who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and had finally decided to put it down. He held the notebook out to her. She sat on the edge of the bed and took it from him. 7 pages, front and back. His handwriting was messier than usual in places, are there to read, but she could make most of it out. Chord progressions, a full first verse, a second verse with words crossed out and a chorus that repeated 3 times with slight variations, as if he was still deciding which version was true. And then, in the last section, the ridge of the lines cut off mid. The page was blank after that. "I can't get to the end," he told her. "I've tried. I know what it's supposed to feel like, but I can't find the words anymore." He paused. "You always knew where my sentences were going before I finished them." She did not answer right away. She looked down at the notebook and read through the chorus again slowly. Something in her chest pulled tight. "The last line," he said quietly. "You already know it. You've always known it. You just haven't said it yet." She wanted to tell him he was wrong. She wanted to say she had no idea what the ending should be, that she needed him to finish it, that the song was his and it should stay his. But the truth was, she had known for years what the song was really about, and she had known, somewhere deep down, exactly how it should end. She just was not ready to say it out loud. Not yet. She closed the notebook carefully and held it against her chest. She told him she would look after it. He nodded. He seemed relieved the way people look when they have handed off something they were afraid they would lose. They stayed like that for a while, not talking. Outside the window, it was starting to get dark. The streetlights came on one by one. Somewhere in the building, someone was cooking dinner, and the smell drifted in under the door. He said something then, very quietly, almost as if he was talking to himself. He said, "The bridge resolves in a minor, and the last image should be about staying, not leaving. That's what the whole song is really saying." She nodded. She memorized it exactly. He passed away on a Tuesday, 3 weeks later. In the early morning hours, when the world was still and quiet, she was there. She had been there most nights by then. When it was over, she stayed for a while longer, sitting beside him, not ready to stand up and walk out and begin the part of her life that came after. Later that day, she went back to her flat. She put the notebook on the shelf above her desk, spine out, the way you would with a book you plan to read again soon. She sat down on the floor of her living room, not the sofa, not the chair, hoosty floor, and she let herself fall completely apart. The guitar leaned against the wall the entire time. Untouched, patient, waiting. The notebook sat on the shelf, waiting, too. For 8 months, she did not play a single note. That might sound dramatic, but it was not a decision she made. It was not like she sat down one day and said, "I'm not going to touch music for a while." It just happened. The guitar stayed in the corner of her room. The notebook stayed on the shelf, and she woke up every morning, went to work, came home, made food she barely tasted, and went to sleep. That was the shape of her days for a long time. People around her were kind. Her family checked in regularly. Old friends from the band sent messages. Her neighbor, an older woman who had known her since she first moved into the building, left food outside her door twice a week without making a fuss about it. She went to a grief group on Thursday evenings, sat in a circle of plastic chairs with people who all had their own version of loss, and sometimes she talked, and sometimes she just listened. It helped, slowly, in the way that things help when you are not even sure you want to be helped yet. She avoided their old rehearsal space entirely. She would take a longer route to the shops just so she did not have to walk past the building. She knew it was not rational. She knew the building was just a building. But grief is not rational, and she had stopped trying to talk herself out of things that made her feel a little safer. Then, one evening in late spring, something shifted. She was sitting at her desk, going through some old files on her laptop when she came across a voice note he had sent her 2 years earlier. Just a short clip, 30 seconds long. Him humming a melody into his phone. The label on the file said only you'll know this one. She sat very still for a moment before she pressed play. It was the song. The unfinished one. Just his voice. No words, no guitar. Only the bare shape of the melody. And hearing it like that, so plain and unguarded, something cracked, open inside her, that she had been trying very carefully to keep sealed. She cried for a long time, and then, when she was done, she got up, crossed the room, and picked up the guitar. She did not play the song that night. She just held the guitar for a while, relearning the weight of it, the feel of the strings under her fingers. She played a few chords. Simple ones, the kind you learn when you are a teenager and you think 3 chords are all you will ever need. It felt good in a quiet, aching way, like stretching a muscle you had forgotten you had. She opened the notebook the next morning. She read through everything he had written slowly, more carefully than she had the first time. Now that the shock had settled, she could see the song more clearly. She could see what he had been reaching for in every crossed-out line, every margin note, every tiny arrow he had drawn pointing from one verse to another. He had been so close, The whole structure was there. The story the song was telling was almost complete. It just needed an ending. The bridge resolved in a minor. He had told her that. The last image should be about staying. He had told her that, too. She picked up a pen and sat with the blank half-page for a long time. She did not try to force it. She had learned, from years of writing music with him, that forcing a line almost always produces the wrong line. The best words come when you stop hunting for them and just sit quietly until they arrive on their own. It took 3 days. On the third morning she woke up early, before her alarm, with the line fully formed in her head. She said it out loud once to herself, just to hear Italiano. Then she wrote it down in the notebook, in her own handwriting, on the line where his had stopped. She stared at it for a long time. It was not clever. It was not poetic in any showy way. It was simple and honest, and it said exactly the thing that the whole song had been trying to say all along. She called the old bandmates that same week. She did not make a big speech about what she was doing or why. She just said she wanted to record something and she needed them. They all said yes, without hesitating. One of them drove 3 hours to be there. A friend offered his home studio a spare room with foam panels on the walls, and 2 decent microphones and a keyboard pushed against one side. It was not fancy. It was exactly right. The recording sessions were unlike anything she had experienced before. There was a heaviness in the room that never fully lifted, but there was also something else underneath it, a kind of purpose. A quiet determination that felt almost physical. Nobody talked much between takes. They just played and listened and played again. She cried through several takes, and they let her. Nobody rushing her. Nobody pretending it was not happening. One of the guitarists, someone who had known him since they were teenagers, had to step outside after the second run-through of the chorus. She could hear him through the door, just breathing, collecting himself. When he came back in, he nodded once and picked up his guitar, and they went again. It took 4 sessions to get it right. The final recording was not perfect in a technical sense. There was a slight roughness to it, a realness that no amount of editing could have manufactured. But it was true. Every note of it was true. She listened to the full mix alone, late at night, with headphones on, and she did not cry. She just sat very still and felt the weight of it settle over her like something she had been waiting to put down for a long time. The tribute concert was organized by his family about 2 months later. A local venue, a few hundred seats. People who had loved him over the years. She was listed on the program as a performer, but she had not told anyone what she was going to play. She had not even told the rest of the band until the day of the show. When she walked on stage, she sat down on a wooden stool, adjusted the microphone, and for a moment she just looked out at the room. She recognized so many faces, people who had been at their very first gig, people who had sent food to his door during the illness, people she had not seen in years who had come back for this. She did not introduce the song. She just began. The first verse settled over the room like the start of something people had been waiting for without knowing it. By the second verse, she could see people shifting in their seats, leaning slightly forward. Someone in the third row put their hand over their mouth. She kept her eyes on the middle distance, the way she always did when she sang something that mattered. Not looking at anyone directly, just sending the words out into the space and trusting them to land where they needed to. When she reached the bridge, she felt her breath catch, a minor. Exactly as he said. And then the final line, the line she had written on that quiet morning 3 days after she opened the notebook. She sang it plainly. No extra weight on it. No dramatic pause before it. Just the words, clear and unhurried, the way he would have wanted. The room went silent, not the polite silence of an audience waiting for applause. A different kind, the kind that means something, the kind that happens when a room full of people all feel the same thing at the same time and no one wants to be the first to break it. It lasted nearly 10 seconds. She counted them without meaning to. Then someone started clapping, and the whole room followed. And a few people were fully crying, and a few were laughing through their tears the way people do when something hits them harder than they expected. She did not take the song public after that. No streaming release, no upload. She considered it a private thing, a conversation between 2 people that had finally reached its ending. She kept performing it occasionally, always at the close of a set, always without introduction. People who heard it live always said the same thing, that it felt like something real, like it had actually happened, like someone had lived it, which, of course, they had. The notebook still sits on the shelf above her desk. His handwriting fills most of it. Hers fills the last few lines. On the inside front cover, in faded pencil, he had written a note to himself at some point, she has no idea when. It says, "Don't rush it. Wait for her. She'll know when it's time." She read that for the first time a year after the concert. She stood there in her flat, alone, holding the notebook open with both hands, and she smiled. It was a real smile, a full one, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and warm and certain. She put the notebook back on the shelf. She picked up her guitar, and she started playing something new.